This one goes out to the Artcasters. Ooh, Artcasters! I say you're casting your spell, Artcasters. Casting your spell. Ooh, you're gonna cast that spell. Strike a hell. Whoa! Ooh. Hi, hi. Hi, hi. Hi, hi.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Artcasters. This is episode 403, I believe. So moving on up on our way to 500. It's going to be a little while till we get there. But we got an awesome guest coming up that I'm just super excited to talk to. But before we get to him, we'll go around and do what we always do and just kind of take a trek around this virtual room here in StreamYard and introduce ourselves, talk about what we got going on, anything we want to promote. So you're on my channel, so that's where you can find me on YouTube. Also, on my YouTube channel, you can find my videos where currently what I'm doing is I'm taking old retro stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, recreating it, putting my own spin on it. If that sounds interesting to you, then definitely check that out. The other thing is my website. You go to my website, circworks.com. You can find my comic book, Young and the Dead. It's a kids versus zombie adventure story. Just think Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. And then I also have tools to help you create comics, digital tools, and just a bunch of cool stuff on there, prints, all that stuff. So definitely check that out, circworks.com. Josh.
Yes. How's it going? Yeah, so if you guys are into supporting indie comics, you should pick up a copy of Jacob's Apartment, the graphic novel about two polar opposites that find themselves, two polar opposite roommates in their 20s who find themselves drawn together through terrible life circumstances, and as they're drawn together, their dreams and reality kind of start interweaving in a way that's like if you took Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind, put it in a blender with Ghost World, and you like that flavor, you'd be really into Jacob's Apartment. So that's available everywhere through Graphic Mundi. And then my other graphic novel, Two Stories, which is a autobiographical comic about faith and mental illness. So go check those out. And yeah, I stream on YouTube, Joshua Kemble. Oh, I also should mention a friend of the show, Dave Baker, has a really brilliant comic coming out through Top Shelf called Mary Tyler Moorhawk, too, that you guys should all buy. So far, every review I've read is singing its praises. So, and it's kind of neat to see Dave getting so much attention for a brilliant book. So, yeah.
That's Mary Tyler Moorhawk?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll check that out. Yeah, you can find my stuff at myname.com, so coreykerr.com. And lately I am working on a series of videos that are deconstructing what makes images work. And so if you want to see stuff like this, where we're talking about how concept and elements, composition and style function together, and how understanding each of these independently of each other can help you make better images, then stick around on my YouTube channel for a follow-up to the last video that I put out last week, and that'll go out in the newsletter at coreykerr.com/email as well. So,
and I would recommend everyone go check out what Corey's doing, because it's just great information, and the way that he delivers it just makes it easy to comprehend, and especially if you're starting out, or if you need a little refresher course or anything. So of course that's, I guess, why Corey is a teacher. So
hopefully that works, right?
Yeah. So moving on to our guest, and I'm super excited because I'm actually involved in a small part in his newest project, which has just been a blast to work on, and it's a project that is going to be published by Gold Key Comics. We've had the Gold Key guys on. You guys know that I'm a big fan of Gold Key and just that whole look and feel. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is sort of that vintage aesthetic. But Jay Stevens is our guest. And if you're a fan of animation, you may know some of his properties that he created: Tutenstin, JetCat, Secret Saturdays, and also as far as the comic front, Dwellings is the big book that he's got, and he's got another one coming out, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But And I'm sure, Jay, you can fill in all the little holes, anything that I didn't mention, but we definitely do want to mention that he has a Kickstarter going. It's not going yet. It starts, what, 5 days, Jay?
It's in 5 days. Yeah, I
5 days.
believe it's going first thing on the 13th. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
and there's a link in the description of this video. Click on that. It'll take you. You can sign up to be notified, but you definitely want to check this out. So Jay, anything that you want to talk about as far as the new project, or anything else that you want to promote, or like I said, any holes that you want to fill into your
resume.
There was a term I was searching for, and
TV.
I guess is what I was looking for. It wasn't coming to my mind. But
no, that's great, Scott. But yeah, no, I'm pretty excited to be back making another comic series. Gold Key, as we were saying just before we went live, is like quite a dream come true for me. I can't believe that the brand is back in this way, and that they fully intend to embrace those elements that made Gold Key so distinctive back in the day, but updating them for modern readership. And so I would have been ticked off if they didn't reach out to me, to be honest, or you for that matter. I mean, like, there are those of us that have been kind of rocking this aesthetic for a while, so it makes sense to me anyway that this came together. I'm just thrilled. So very excited. Figgy Furthermore is the new book. It's about a ghost dog, a spirit guide dog, who sticks around to keep looking after his still living boy, who's, your old school Dennis the Menace type comic brat. So he keeps getting into trouble, so this dog has to stick around from the other side to make sure that he keeps his kid alive, is the basic premise. And it's the Kickstarter is going to have all kinds of unbelievably crazy bells and whistles, not least of which are some variant covers by incredible guest artists. So thank you for that, Scott.
Yeah, the other thing, I don't know, can I mention the other thing that we kind of did for your campaign, the other kind of vintage thing?
Hey, look, Arnold spoiled it in another podcast. I'm pretty sure the truth is out there. This is so cool, dude. Yeah.
So hopefully I can pick that up. So
that's amazing.
These are the wax packs. And we're breaking kayfabe here a little bit, but inside this is just some blank cards, because Arnold's still designing the actual trading cards. But it's, if you've seen any of my videos where I show my process of making wax packs, they are very authentic look and feel. They're not actually screen printed, but they're made to look like they are, and really you couldn't tell the difference. I mean, it's super close, but just to be able to work on this, I had a blast with that. I'm glad the guys at Gold Key reached out, because I love creating all kinds of vintage type looks, and
that's how you kick off capturing a vintage aesthetic show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The wax pack.
Are you familiar with this book, Jay?
Oh yeah, I have that somewhere in here. Yeah.
This is like my Bible. So basically, for my YouTube channel, I look through this book and I think, well, what can I recreate some of this stuff? So then I'm like I'll make my own version of the kryptonite rock or whatever. So all that kind of stuff. But that's, I mean, you and I think kind of kindred spirits as far as
for sure
looking at that, all that kind of stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And
absolutely.
And I kind of missed the boat with my own comic. And I think once I eventually, because it's black and white, but I think I want to do a colored version, and I want to kind of give it that retro aesthetic. So, but I just love it. And I watched the video on the process and of how you create how you create that vintage look, at least for dwellings. And I assume it's a similar process for Figgy Furthermore. So I don't know. Do you want to just kind of get into how you approach taking something using, and I think you work mostly traditional, right? You do.
I now have a hybrid. Yeah, if you guys want to talk shop, I have a few props handy. So yeah, absolutely. Still, I'm using a hybrid method now, and I can explain it pretty simply. But I used to, the last time I was making comics, so 20 comic books, pardon me, because I've always been in adjacent fields. Did some animation, daily comic strips. That's the one we missed. Something I did in between my comic book projects is a brief sojourn into daily newspaper strips, which was crazy. It's the hardest thing I ever did, and still proud of it, but It's not the right time to be trying to launch newspaper strips.
No, not really.
But I love every aspect of cartooning. But back when I was doing comics, I was still working, twice up, large boards, and traditional inking with a brush and dipping into ink. And then, pardon me, spent a summer in the Czech Republic, in Prague, while I still had work to finish for Dark Horse Comics. It was the Dark Horse Land of Nod series, so the JetCat stuff. And I started trying to figure out a way to sort of travel work. I knew I could get paper that I could use there, but I wasn't so sure I could get the ink I was used to. So I tried a few travel brush pens, and the one that I ended up liking the best is the Pentel color brush. I don't know if people can see
Color brush.
it.
Is that one that you fill yourself?
You can.
Okay.
There's refills, so it's a really large synthetic brush, so you can get really bold, thick, thin lines. There's these are the refills. Oops, what are we doing?
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So, and the cartridges are actually not a waterproof ink. They're water soluble intentionally, so you can blend them. They're pretty color fast, and like they don't blend that easily. But it doesn't bother me because I don't work over my black line. Right. So, but if you wanted to work on top of this sort of white medium or something, you could refill these cartridges with any kind of ink. It would work, and I have done that too. But that's my sort of go-to brush. And then for smaller detail and lettering, I'm using the gray Stedler pigment liners. That's pretty much it. So I'm still doing all that ink by hand and then scanning the color. And the way I work, I hope this will show up.
If it doesn't, I pulled some stills from one of your videos. So
fantastic! But yeah, so this is some Figgy stuff. So, I have a pale cyan template, and I pencil my roughs just on the template, and I know where the panel breaks are, and I can move them over. Again, because I'm working in traditional sort of gold key kids comic 8-panel grids, there's a certain delightful limitation to what I'm doing anyway. So I have this kind of structure. I scan those pencils, and the pale cyan is an old animation trick. So, when I started doing animation, it was the tail end of traditional animation, and, it's non-repro blue. So when I scan that pencil in as it's just sort of a high contrast, only the pencil lines show up. And then I print those out.
And luckily you don't have to use a stat cam anymore for that kind of thing,
So I'm just, and again, I'm limited in paper size for this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just using the thickest weight, smoothest printer paper that I can find.
Oh, I like it. That's
and
cool.
So, and it works. So I just use my scanner, scan the pencils, and then I reprint those out twice up in like 2 pieces.
Hold on a second. I was trying to get you full screen. Hey, can you guys help me out? There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. So then I just print those. So now it's twice up. So I'm working larger, and then I just ink over. You can barely see the blue lines on that. It's pretty pale.
Yeah.
And so
are you working individual panels, and then you scan it all in, and then
this happens to be a half page. That's a bad example.
Okay.
Yeah. So
all right.
Yeah. So that was kind of a splash. So, and then I just work that, and again, it's high contrast, scan those in, and then coloring. So it's a weird, semi-digital process now at the end. But to get that look, this is one of my favorite old gold key comics. But again, so similar, large panel, small, like their panel breaks are pretty standard. You get a few longer ones, and then again, color wise, right on VV Argos, that's cool. So for the color then too, to keep that vintage look, is I'm trying to limit myself into the percentages. So CMYK coloring, and again, being as old as I am and having started as long ago as I did, I used to hand cut separations for my covers. So, I still have that brain. So using like, 30%, 50%, 70%, and 100% mixes of cyan, magenta, and yellow to get the colors, you're automatically limiting your palette to a retro look.
Mhm.
And then the only difference between the work in Dwellings, collection comes out in April, by the way.
Yeah, I'm pre-ordered for that. So.
Right on. The only difference between the coloring stage in Dwellings and Figgy Furthermore is that for Dwellings, because we wanted it to look actually damaged, like an older comic, I did do a Ben-Day dot half screen. So you keep the black layer separate, and then I just would flatten the color at one point, and then just throw over that the Photoshop halftone works. It's the actual same angles that the old Ben-Day dot pattern would be, so it's the same thing. And then you can go in and drag, the magenta layer off register a bit. You can get that really cool.
I did that with the trading cards and everything.
Yeah, it's and then sometimes I will. Oftentimes, if I'm doing that kind of look, I'll actually lighten the black layer too, as if it's faded, so you can kind of see some of the underprinting. So that's really fun for Dwellings. And then we sort of damaged the paper look a little bit. For Figgy, it's different. I'm definitely using the old school palette, but because we're doing a new old take, I'm keeping the colors clean.
Yeah, because they kind of have they definitely have kind of a cross between modern and vintage, the gold key. Now, the one thing that I have to talk to Arnold about this, but because I got my copy of Boris Karloff, and I was a little bummed that they didn't go with flat stock, because it's kind of a glossy stock. So hopefully, have you talked to them about the stock of the paper and everything?
No, not yet.
You got to make sure they go with the flat stock on your book.
Good point, actually.
Yeah.
What's my average page count per day or week, please? Oh, that's interesting. That's harder to pinpoint exactly, because depending on, first of all, a couple of things, depending on my creativity level, there are days when I should be writing and I don't feel like writing. There are days that my hand cramps up for inking, so it's not a great inking day. So I kind of split the workload up. So it's not exactly like I follow one page through necessarily. But for Figgy, I'd say, I'm doing about 4 to 6 pages a week with this book, all said and done. But I might write 8 to 14 pages in a day or two. It sort of depends. And then some, you're going to catch a cold here or there. So it's kind of, but I'd say, it's not that, I'm not that ambitious. I know people that can produce a lot more than me. My work looks really easy to draw, but it's not.
Anyone that's a cartoonist knows that. But so do you tend, because you have a lot of different ideas and properties and things that you work on. Do you kind of stick to one at a time, or do you work on multiple things at a time, multiple projects? That's
a very good question. I do try to follow an idea through, but it's not always possible, and also it's not always healthy. There are some times when I get stuck on a project or just creatively burnt out on a project, just temporarily, for the day, where I'm just like, I need to do something else. So I do some local illustration work. That stuff's great because it's usually a one-day project when I can get around to it. So that's fun. And then then you can just jump off of the train you're on and fool around with something completely different. Follow that right through, and then be done in a day or two, and then get back to the thing with a fresh creative juice, Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. And then but honestly, it's different. I still do some just writing. Like, there's some projects I'll be writing. There's actually, this is a bit of a tease. I don't think you would mind. There's some big news coming from Oni Press, actually, my new publisher for Dwellings. So I'll be doing some writing for them. I can't talk more about it yet, I don't think. I'll get in big trouble. But that's a bit easier to kind of take a break from drawing and write something that's different, where a different artist is going to pick it up. But if I'm following through with a particular visual vision for something like Figgy Furthermore, I kind of want to follow it all the way through.
Yeah.
It is hard to unless you really want it. Like you were saying, take the occasional illustration job or whatever that deviates in style just to give you a fresh day or two. but it's tough to like be forced to deviate when you're really in the flow, or like, you know, like your turnarounds are just like on point or something. It's like when you've got those days going, to have to like switch gears and then have to kind of re get into that can be really tough. That's yeah.
No, Joshua, you're totally right too. And like, you can lose the flow. You know, you
Yeah.
can have that. You've just done, 10 pages of something and it's working, and then you jump off, and then you try to come back. You're like, I forget what I was doing here.
Yeah.
It just feels wrong. Yeah, it's tricky.
So do you? So what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. I thought I had a good one. So let's. I know what I was going to ask you. So when Gold Key reaches out to you, do you already have like just like a notebook of ideas to draw from, or do you create that on the spot, or do you have something ready to go? Like, I was going to self-publish this, but it would be a good fit for Gold Key, or how does that work?
So Gold Key was specifically different. So I do have a notebook of ideas, and that does sometimes work out. It does happen. And in fact, this project with Oni worked out because I had some ideas that I thought would work when they came to me with this other thing. But with Gold Key, it was like a thunderbolt. I just started work on Dwellings, I think. I mean, Gold Key and I have been talking for a while about this, like pretty much since they started up. Okay. They reached out early on, I think, because of Dwellings, because it looked on point for kind of what they had in mind for like a retro modern kids comic. And so we've been talking for a while, and really when they just reached out, they said, would you like to submit an idea? Like I had a lot of Gold Key comics as a kid. I got really excited, and these ideas came because there are backup features in Figgy as well. But so Figgy Furthermore, the Spirit Guide Dog, Wax and Wayne, the little outer sprites.
I think I can pull up some. Let's see. Hold on.
Yeah.
There's
yeah. So oh, that's great. Yeah. So Wax and Wayne. That idea might have been kicking around. I didn't have sketches of them, but I think I had this. I like old school Hanna-Barbera style Pixies, like Great Gazoo or Adamant types. So, and then Kitschy and the Witchcraft. So Kitschy is this little girl whose grandmother has a magic basket, and she keeps making crafts out of it that come to life. And so the issue always ends with an actual craft, like how to make which is just thought it would be fun. Those all came to me in like the next day. Like
wow.
It just kind of, I was like, I really do want to pitch to Gold Key. What can I come up with?
Yeah.
And it was just one of those strange moments. It's happened a few times, but
yeah. I remember, there's been a few times where I've created, because a lot of what I do is I write and draw my own stuff, but every once in a while somebody will come to me, and I have a friend who's a voiceover actor, and he was working on this demo. He says, I need some ideas from bits. So we just sat down, and I don't know, it was just like lightning struck, and I came up with like 20 like really good bits for him to do, and we came up with the character, and I got really into it. I'm like, oh, and this character is like this and this, and then he just, once he did all the voices, I'm like, wow, this is great. But it's just weird how sometimes those ideas just, I don't know, you get in a flow state or something, and they're just pouring out of you.
I think, in fact, I'm quite sure though that it's that same thing about when I do hit a brush line, it's pretty good. It looks easy, but it's 30 years of work that gets you there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe with those ideas too, I think they're already there. It does feel like a bit of a miracle, but I think it's just because we've already put the work in, and they're just right there already. Yeah,
and it's for those of us that kind of a lot of our work and everything is derives from nostalgia and the things we grew up loving and everything. I guess that's probably the case of most people, but it's the same thing with me. I mean, I my book is kind of like Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. So I'm a big horror fan, but I also like all those kid action movies of the 80s where kids were the heroes. So I mean, well, no one's ever done this with zombies, at least at the time when I started writing it.
Right.
So it's like, oh, those two things fit together. And my next book has to do with kaiju and hip hop, of all things, because those are two things I really love. And I'm like, how can these things fit together? So it's you've got all these little ideas, and like, it's like, okay, so how do I take all these things I love and put it together in like one nice little package there? So I imagine that's the same thing. I mean, you have so many entries, it's like, oh, I love this thing, but I've never done anything like that. So
yeah, Dwellings was a lot like that for me, in that I have friends who work in sort of low budget horror. Well, their budgets are getting bigger, but anyway, and I'd jumped into the art department a few times with my friends, and we've worked on some of these horror films before, which is, a passion of mine. And I got to be a cult member in the Heretics too, so dream come true. And I had these ideas I was writing down for them, like just sort of pitch ideas for, low budget art house horror movies. And it was during the beginning of lockdown where I just went, well, and I was losing work, and I thought, what if I combined the horror stories I have sitting around with like a Hanna-Barbera style visual, like, and again was one of those things where like I wanted to do two different things. I went, what if it's the same thing?
Yeah.
How weird would that be? Yeah.
I love that. I also, if you haven't yet, you need to meet friend of the show, David Hartman. You guys would.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of that when you were talking about every Halloween episode we have David on, and he's a director. He directed like one of the Phantasm films, but he does a lot of stuff in animation. He does a lot of stuff for Netflix and Scott Snyder and Rob Zombie and all kinds of stuff. He's like fast as far as drawing. We had him on one episode.
1 hour. In 1 hour, he did a full page from blue line to colored finished, and I was like, I hate you. And that was happening during the show. I was like, I can't cartoon anymore. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm jealous by people that have that kind of focus. And I mean, it's, again, animation people. Like, you got to get fast. And hang on. I've got a bit of dry throat, guys. Sorry. And also comic strip people. I mean, most of that stuff's a little simpler, but that was interesting to work on Oh Brother with Bob Weber Jr., who was the writer of the comic.
So that's a daily, right? Was that a daily?
Yeah. And so yeah,
that's work, man.
It is a lot, and then the Sundays too. But the other thing that I did to myself for that was, people are gonna get mad. I don't love the way that a lot of those dailies were colored back then. I would ask why Patrick McDonald's Mutts looked so good. I was like, the colors are beautiful in that. Why is it so different? And they're like, oh, he does his own color. I'm like, oh, doesn't everybody? And they're like, no, we just get people to do it. And I was like, well, okay, well, I want it to look good, so I got to color them. So I was drawing and coloring a full strip every day.
Nice.
Every single day of the, like no time off unless you work ahead. You can't take a break. And it's an interesting challenge,
Yeah, I would have to assume that Watterson did his own coloring too, because his is notably different from everything else.
Exactly. For sure he did his own sets. Yeah, for sure he did.
And that even goes back to like Winsor McKay and stuff. Yep. You look at that and like, why is this that came out like 100 years earlier way better looking than everything that's in the pages right now?
Yeah, you find out that McKay was actually back in the print room being like, no, blend these two colors so it looks like watercolor. Like, it's just crazy.
Sure. He was like a circus poster designer before this, right? Yeah, so he knew what he was doing.
And from Frank King too, like Gasoline Alley,
so
the colors in that, this actually ties into the retro thing that we were talking about. But it's like, one of the things I love about looking into the past is quite often they had it right and we kind of deviated in the wrong way. So like, if you look at like the colors of like initial early comic strips when they first had color, and like Hearst was what was his quote about, like, when he was running his papers, he said the comic section looked like being hit with a lead pipe of rainbows or something. Like,
yeah, no, I forget something about a rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's just like they had it so accurate in a lot of things, or like they had really beautiful line weights or beautiful styles of expression and cartooning. And it's like, I think one of the things that a lot of people who do retro also are really intrigued by is like kind of returning to something that was possibly just better. And I find that at least with a lot of old cartooning, you know, where you look at like cartoon modern stuff and it's like a lot of those cartoonists, man, were just killer. Like, it's, you know.
Yeah. And just talking about color again, I just wanted to pull out a
that's
page
so
from
beautiful.
Dwellings, right? So this kind of color work too, right? I'm not trying to toot my own horn because this is again, this is me just looking at older. But the idea that if your color palette, I'll do that. So this idea that it's just purples and blues, right? And again, they're just the percentages that you would be working with. But if your palette's limited to begin with, you
no,
necessity being the mother of invention, you start coming up with creative, bolder color choices. And everyone used to do this. Kirby and Ditko in the early Marvel days were doing solid red figures with like bright yellow back. Like, everybody was doing this. When you had a limited palette, you were being bolder with your colors, and nobody does that anymore. Everything's all these muted, realistic colors, which is fine, but it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, it's, as far as cup of tea goes, I think another part of it is the limitations that we had back then, or even before our time. But I mean, when you see like an old school comic reprinted with modern, just those bright, just solid, it just does, something's wrong with it. It doesn't look, I mean, arguably, even with like the trading cards now, they've got the, you know, foil and like poly, you know, wrapped cards, and the printing, arguably the printing it's better, you know. Same thing with the cards themselves. You know, it's not all off register and everything. So arguably it looks better, but there's just something, to me, there's something missing. It's that aesthetic of things being a little off, or using the materials that you had back in those days. A lot of it was cheaper materials, like the cardboard they used. I mean, comparatively, I mean, you look at a trading card nowadays, it's glossier, it's a better photograph, all that stuff, but I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me personally, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. What is that nostalgic attraction? Because I'm absolutely on the same page. It feels like a lot of the older printed materials, cheap disposable printed materials, you know, ephemera, stuff that was meant to be read and destroyed or thrown away.
Wacky packs.
Yeah, all that stuff. There was a kind of like casualness to it. And so they all look like quick little risograph prints, you know, like each of them looks like a one-off print, where some are off register, some aren't. You know, the paper trims on some comics are bad, like that Gold Key comic I held up. You know, there's this one's fine, but like sometimes those three, I almost feel like their logo was like a color test.
I wonder about that. And I know the new one they're using, you know, I'm sure this is Arnold's thing, but he's using like cyan, magenta, you know, and yellow and black for the color scheme of the logo and everything.
I love it.
Yeah.
But you know, the new stuff. So yeah, those things look like stamps or prints. Like something's they feel somehow more like art objects.
Yeah.
And newer stuff just looks like slick. To me, the slicker stuff looks more disposable. It looks more it looks more commonplace. It doesn't seem as special. And I don't know if that's just me being an old guy, but that's how it feels to me. And speaking of the oversaturated color, I did say earlier that I'm not affecting the color of Figgy Furthermore in the same way I'm doing Dwellings, but I am, at the end of all the coloring, lightening the whole thing by 20%, because that old percentage, like 100% yellow and 100% magenta, making that bright red, that was being printed on absorbent paper. That was never going to look like a fire engine red. It was gonna dull. So I do dull the colors because that's the actual look I want.
Yeah, I've got there's different software, and I'm actually going to meet with I don't know if you're familiar with Retro Supply Company.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
So I'm meeting with Dustin tomorrow to talk about something, but I use a lot of their products where there's a Photoshop action that gives sort of that ring absorption around the black, and so it just makes it look like that old style stuff. So
Yeah. I think on the note of limitations too, like I remember when I was first like in art school, like one of the things I did a lot of was, which I don't really utilize anymore, was like life painting. And even with painting, like oil painters that are like worth their salt usually don't have like 20 million colors. They usually have like a palette of like 16 colors at the most on their palette. And then from there, they're deriving all colors using color comparison. And so it's like, if you look at like really brilliant paintings by like the masters and stuff like that, like a lot of them are like really boiled down to like a limited palette. Even Cezanne, like who's like these brilliant bright colors, it's like you look at his fruits and stuff and it's really, not a lot of colors that he's deriving all those colors from. And I think like you were saying too, Jay, with the limitation of palettes too, limitation of panels. I think there's something about limitations that can create a really good aesthetic. I feel like that's almost like one of the fundamentals of design is like, graphic design. Like one of the worst things you could ever do is use like 50 fonts. Right. Generally, you want to use, a minimal amount of fonts, right? Because the more fonts, the more chaos. and so I don't know. I feel like comics had this moment, especially like thinking like 90s like Image era comics, where they were just having that wow, we can use the full color spectrum and just rainbow unicorns barfing everywhere kind of colors. But I feel like there is like a return back to an extent because of that, because it's just like those limitations actually create like more creativity, like you were showing, Jay, with that like foreground character in the dark who's like bright pinkish, like magenta-ish purple. And it's like nobody's magenta-ish purple in the dark, but it works.
It reads.
It reads, and it's more fun than what it would actually look like. And also it's cartooning, so why are we bothering with what it would actually look like? I don't know.
That's right. But again, I like to hope, if I was doing dwellings, because they are told straight horror stories.
Yeah,
I'd like to think if I was drawing that in a more realistic style, I like to think I still would have been brave enough to do that.
Yes,
that's because EC would have had garish, strange color combos too. It's I think a lot of people are missing out, and I'm dismissing a lot of modern colorists in comic books who do experiment with color in great ways. I'm not. This is an overgeneralization. Let's be honest.
You hear that, Dave Stewart? Jay Stevens is calling. I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's a great example of someone. But again, that's also great character design, because when you have a spot of red that you can move almost like a musical note throughout the pages, you're already set up for success.
I think
we're talking about Hellboy. Whoever didn't know what we were talking about there. We're talking about Hellboy.
I think one of the things is we often, from a technological standpoint, try to sprint towards realism. And for one, I don't know if we can actually agree on what realism is, since we're all just interpreting electrical impulses through with no comparison from one person to the next. But you look at something like motion smoothing on a television, and that technically is more accurate to what the camera is capturing, but it ruins everything because it looks terrible, right? And so if you look at, like, if I walk outside on a sunny day, those colors are so saturated and so bright that there is no nuance in the contrast of the hue. There's no nuance. There's no vignette. There's no focus. There's no one really designing what I'm looking at from like a compositional standpoint or a hierarchy. And so I don't think like the natural inclination of most like software engineers and hardware engineers is what we should be doing as artists. Like I totally agree with the idea of, let's limit and let's reduce and let's kind of mess with it and push things and whatever, because I think visually we tend to just kind of like scan reality in a way of like looking for like semiotics and symbol system type of things, so that we can navigate the world. But when we're trying to like consume a story or internalize like the emotion of a printed page, I think emotion is a lot different than actual reality. And so it's kind of like that idea of like actual alignment versus optical alignment. Like actually aligning things usually isn't as good as optically aligning things. And this is getting into the weeds, but like if you're aligning the top of your X height, you want your O's and your other, the bottom of the U to dip below the more harder, flatter things because it actually looks right, even though it's technically wrong. And so I'm all about being technically incorrect as long as it serves the story and the emotion and the mood and what you're trying because if everything was 100% accurate to reality, why would I need to experience it? I have reality. I'm going to comics and movies and games and art and illustration and animation because it's not reality.
I totally agree, Corey. And yeah, it's like all those cartoon shows as a kid that were about school. I'm like, why would you make a show about school? I'm
Right.
home from school. But
I already did that today.
Yeah.
But I like to think of the way that I've gradually evolved in my drawing as becoming more hieroglyphic. I mean, an alphabet is a series of drawings that turn into language anyway, and I am trying to draw the least. So in Dwellings and Figgy Furthermore, and in some of my JetCat work previously, I'm trying to draw the least to convey what needs to happen.
I love that.
So I'm trying to turn the drawings and the panels into an alphabet, as much as possible, without losing the kind of things that I love. Like I still need expression and character and gesture. So, how reductive can I get without drawing stick figures, which is also fine. There are some great comics that are basically stick figures. That works too, but I'm looking for something in between, but I'm looking for my own alphabet.
I love that. I also think, there's definitely like you have like such a good sense of like thick and thin line weight. It would be a shame to lose that. When reducing. That reminds me a lot of like I think a lot of us have a lot of people like him, but like that reminds me a lot of like Chris Ware's like talking about like kind of creating like semiotics through comics. And when you look at his work, like he's also like really obsessed with retro of a different kind, but when you look at his work, it definitely is that. It's like the simplest it could possibly be to convey the story emotionally. I think there is something to that. I envy that because I'm not. I mean, sometimes I work that way, but in general, like I tend to draw the opposite of that, and so whenever I look at that done well, I really admire it because it's just
I love.
It's hard to do,
Yeah, I love Chris Ware's work, and I do think there is some overlap there in inspirations. Let's say, like I do think his stuff is definitely retro. It's pulling from something very nostalgic.
Oh yeah.
And I would say, especially his Quimby stuff, those mouse characters are a lot like musical notes, the way they play across the page. And then some of his panel structures too feel like jazz. They feel like it's a depending on where you start in the scene, you can kind of replay the phrase.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. And way ahead of everybody. Like, that's so
yeah,
good.
I think we all had that moment reading Jimmy Corrigan where you're like reading the page and you kind of rotate and then you're like, wait, what the hell did he just do? Like, how did you do that? Like, that's a insane thing. But yeah, I love that kind of thinking about breaking it down to its simplest form because we're storytellers, right? And we want to convey a clear story to people. That's the goal of cartoon.
Well, what's interesting though is I think Chris had a slightly different idea with that. I think he wanted it to look clear, but I think I don't know. I'd have to talk to him. It seems intentionally obtuse at times. Like it looks like he's making it harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's doing that on purpose, and that's interesting. That's a very interesting idea that you're asking something of the reader. You're asking them to come into it and work on it. And that's a very interesting thing. That's not what I'm doing, but I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's interesting, and I'm going to kind of dance around this, but I don't want to like group Chris Ware into what I'm getting at. But like his stuff is so technically proficient, all drawn by hand, but it might as well be digital because it's so perfect, you know. But I think there's also, when you're getting into like what Corey was talking about as far as the photorealism and everything, I think to the masses that's really attractive for some reason, because you'll see stuff just go viral where somebody will do something and people will be like, oh, it looks just like the real thing. I can't believe this person took something and made it look so real. But and that takes a lot of technical skill to be able to do that, and I can't do that. But I don't know. It's like it's still there's it doesn't have, to me, it doesn't have that kind of character. But there's a lot of people that are just wowed by the fact that somebody could take something and draw it to look so realistic. Whereas for me, it's all about style. It's all about interpretation.
Yeah,
I think perfect realism tends to be more of an exhibition than an art.
I want to quote that. That's brilliant.
And that's why it does so well virally on like video.
Right.
When like you see that,
because you look at it and you're fascinated at the exhibition of it, but I don't know that it elicits any other emotion other than like, wow, that looks hard. But I get this, I get the same type of thing as I see, somebody lifting a huge amount of weight. I'm like, wow, that seems hard. But I don't know that I get like,
or somebody, a pop singer that can hit more than a few octaves and does
or like a shreddy
all the way
guitarist
through the whole song. Yeah,
a shreddy guitarist who like shreds, tears it, but like the music's like meh.
Well,
it's like
look
wow,
look at like a Steve Vai, right? Like maybe one of the best technical guitarists alive. His music is incredibly boring, but like you listen to Enter the Alien or whatever, and you're like, he is fast and he's hitting a lot of notes that technically sound like they're not incorrect. And I'm very bored. So it's impressive and his fingers move quickly, but it's an exhibition more than music.
Yeah, the thing I used to tell students with that was because I like trying to teach them about, illustration and like kind of having a voice and stuff like that. It's like I'd rather see a wild attempt that ends in failure with like a concept behind it than just like a rendering of a duck, because like if you went to a gallery and everybody just rendered the same picture of a duck, you might go in there and be like, wow, these look just like photos. You're going to walk out of there and I wouldn't know anybody's name in that gallery as I walk away, because I'd just be like, yeah, there were a bunch of duck photos, but they weren't photos, but they looked like photos, like, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And here's a good question too, connected to what we're saying, is if you're telling a story with art that looks realistic, are you working against the nature of comics? So, if the drawing's so busy, aren't you dragging the eyeballs to a halt? Instead of moving them through the story and instead of showing them simply what they're supposed to take from that panel before they move on, aren't you kind of confusing things by adding too much detail? That sounds like me kind of crapping on everybody that draws detailed comics, but there are people who can draw beautifully detailed, intricate drawings, but also have a strong enough design sense where the way the figure moves through the page, the detail is still necessary and only as necessary as it needs to be. But, I just feel like overworking the drawing is kind of counterintuitive to making comics.
I also like that, because Jay, you were saying, your style, like to some could look really simple, but it's not. It's a lot of work. I think a tell of somebody who's been cartooning for a while, usually when somebody's young, introduced to cartooning or art or animation, they'll look at like the really rendered stuff and be like, wow, man, I want to draw like that. Like, I wish I could draw like that. And you'll look at stuff, you know, that you grew up with, like, you know, Uncle Scrooge or something like that. Be like, I don't know, I want to draw like McFarlane or something like that.
Right.
As you mature as an artist, you start realizing, no, Uncle Scrooge was where it was at. Like, even if I'm drawing in a totally different style, it's like, that's the hard stuff, like the pogo stuff, like the like
For
the kind of
sure.
older simplified stuff. Like, that's the stuff that I look at. I'm like, man, I can't, you know, like a lot of guys that are real simple, I can't come close. I can't hold a
It's a
canvas
lot harder
as an
to-
artist.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to hide your mistakes when you're working with a more simplistic
Yeah,
style.
That's right. And it's hard to know what notes not to play.
Yeah.
You know, to use another music metaphor, right? Like these people know what to leave out. That's hard to
Yeah.
figure that out. To know what you don't need. The one thing I would say that I'm still jealous of, and I would like to eventually work into my art somewhere, is that I do have that tight line and I love it. It feels good. Like, it gives me joy to ink like that. But guys like Watterson, or going back further, like John Stanley, when he was inking himself on like Melvin Monster 13 going on 18, that sort of more gestural brush. Like,
Oh,
it's
the
still got
dry
that-
brush.
Yeah, it's got that state. Like, sometimes Watterson would just like break that line, and oh man, if I could just free up like that. Like, that's the dream, is to eventually do a project where I loosen that brush line a little, still keep it crispy, but like it has that energy, that kind of dynamism to it.
There's a lot of modern artists like a Scotty Young who have that kind of, it looks really kind of dashed out, but try to replicate that and you're going to be in trouble, because it's just there's just so much fluidity and so much like motion, and it just it's pretty amazing to be able to. And that's kind of like what our friend that we were talking about, David Hartman, he's kind of got that same style too, where it's kind of
Yeah.
just, you know,
Loose.
kind of looks dashed out, very loose, but it's, you know,
But controlled. Like, it's that like weird I get that from like if I think about like dry brush, real quick line art that I'm jealous of, it's always going to be like Craig Thompson's inks.
Oh yeah, for
It's
sure.
like,
yep.
There's just a speed to but it's like a perfect thick and thin, but you see the brush just kind of spazzing out a little bit. But it's fully controlled. Yeah, that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to do.
And I have hung out with Craig a couple times, and he like, that hurts his hand. Like, it looks loose and relaxed, but
yeah,
that's a very controlled line, because you see, you can't. Sometimes if I do a line and I kind of I can just go over it.
Yeah.
And because it's on off, you know, it's nice and thick. I can kind of correct it. You can't do that with a line like Craig's doing, right? He only gets that one chance to hit that line.
Oh, that's scary, but also cool. Like, it's just scary, but cool.
I mean, unless you're working digitally, and again, I can, but I don't.
yeah.
Then you can hit that line as many times as you want. You can just redo that line.
Yeah, and you see that too. You see that because, like, going from, I mean, I do a lot of digital now, but coming from traditional, where I put that line down, that's a one-time thing, but I find if I'm working digital, I'll go like that, and like, it just doesn't. And part of that's because you don't have that quite that connection you do with the brush and the page traditionally, because it's there. But when you have that disconnect, it's like, that doesn't look right. I've got to do it again like 2 or 3 times to get that line right.
Well, that brings up an interesting question about a vintage look, a vintage aesthetic, is that I wonder how much the materials matter in that look, right? Like, maybe there is something a little bit random, mystical to working on paper, where you get micro mistakes, or it just changes the feel of it to the point where maybe that's part of it. Maybe it kind of has to look that way to look that way.
Yeah.
I also think that there's a bit of this is getting a little ethereal, but I also think there is a different connection that we have, like as a tactile response to glass and plastic, that we have to basically wood pulp. I think I can measure instinctively through like the tactile response of the speed and the fibers of the paper better mentally than I can on glass and plastic. And so I think there's some of that as well. You get a lot more randomized resistance on depending on the tool that you're using on that paper than you are on an extremely smooth surface. And so there's some of that as well that I think adds to that because I can draw a much straighter line or a much more controlled line on paper than I can digitally. And I think digital does everything it possibly can, all the tools you can to try to compensate for that. But everything that digital is doing is trying to compensate for the fact that it isn't paper.
Yeah, and I think that like if you are going to draw digitally, I think that conversation of limitations is pretty smart. Like, you know, knowing that you have the option to eternally undo. I think that the better artists that I know that work digitally, or whenever I'm having to work digitally, it's like I keep that in mind. So I'm like, okay, I get 2 tries at this line max. You know, like that's
Yeah,
like
that's smart. Yeah.
yeah, or like the eternal zoom problem where you're like, I'm going to allow myself to zoom in 150 and that's it. Like no more because I'm not going to be closer than that. Like if I'm drawing this on a page, like setting in mind some of those limitations can help kind of mimic what you're doing. Because I think that what a lot of people forget when they're working digitally is like you're mimicking something. You know, almost all digital art processes are mimicking something that was, you know, done in a dark room or done like with a stat cam or like done with, you know, a ruby lith film or something like that. So remembering what you're mimicking and the process of that, like Jay was explaining with like the color separations, you know, like your CMYK percentage is the best colorists I know, man, they all have their favorites, you know, like for me, I like to keep CMYK, my at least 5 difference in numbers. Like it needs to be like 95 or whatever. It has to have 5 difference between my cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and avoid black as much as possible. You know,
Yeah.
but there's like all these old hat tricks like that like come from like the print world where you were working with plates, and you're still at the end of the day working with plates. You know, so like I guess that's my point is like I think it's good for us to remember what the thing is we're trying to do. But I agree. I think at heart, like you're never going to quite get that hand done, that unspoken hand done thing without it being hand done. That's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, you're right. Those little blips, the little mistakes, the little splotch.
Yeah, like speaking of zoom, I mean, because I'm still working on paper and I showed you the size, it's like if I blow that up to, I scanned it at a pretty high res, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's an organic edge.
Yeah.
Like this isn't designed to be a billboard.
Yep.
You know, like it's unclean if you go into but it's not necessary because it's not getting any bigger, it's getting smaller and it's going on paper.
Yep.
So you're good.
Yeah, I think that's why I find like my process now. I mean, sometimes I will, it depends what it is. If it's like client project or something, I will ink digitally depending on what it is. But I'm still, even though mostly I've switched, other than sketching and stuff, mostly I've switched over to digital pencils, but printing those out in blue line and then inking it by hand because no one's going to know the better. No one's going to see your pencils because it's invisible at that point, but still having that ink look. Unless I'm working like I do a lot of stuff in Illustrator too, because I want like a real technical look, but it just kind of depends. But that, you know, there's something about having that line art with just the little, I don't know, that rougher edges, not so clean that I don't know.
Yeah. It's I don't know if it's adding a challenge that I find satisfying. Oh, yeah, somebody's talking about.
I'm just throwing this up for anybody who like might be doubting Charles Schultz. Like somebody in the comments said Schultz is harder to do than
Spawn.
Than Spawn, and I would
harder to draw
agree.
Harder to draw well.
Yeah, when you see this guy at his prime, like look at that dog, look at that line. That was just busted out quick and beautifully. I mean,
again, every day, every single day for 50 years, he didn't have any assistants.
I mean, look at that, like the way he did that the hair, like This is just massive work.
I like the
love it.
the bed quilt. How he just does this quick gestural pattern, just a tiny bit of texture, to kind of give it some weight.
Yeah,
like on. Oh wow.
And it's interesting to see the
so
evolution.
check out 1950s Charlie Brown if you guys.
When you look at this early Charlie Brown, you're seeing like a 3/4 view of the head, which eventually switched to either front on or side, and that was it. That's all you got.
And some of that was just necessity because his hand was just
or maybe even just profile. Did it get to the point where it's just everything was profile? I'm trying to remember. I don't know.
Again, I think that's a guy, and he didn't have a lot of time to think about this. Like I said, he drew that every day for 50 years straight. He fought every effort of fans and academics calling it great art, which I think we can all agree it is great art, but he was like, I didn't have time to make art. I was doing a daily strip. But again, I think what happened is the Peanuts became an alphabet.
Yep.
Right. Yep. Just like we were talking about earlier, like as he kept going, like the Snoopy Doghouse in the 50s ones too is 3/4.
Yeah.
And then he just went, why?
Yeah.
I go like that. It's a doghouse.
Yeah.
It's the letter A, like
yeah.
we have our alphabet. I don't have to draw 3/4.
That's actually a brilliant point. And the thing is, like, every single thing in there is iconic and recognizable. And, like everybody's got their, striped shirt or whatever identifiable like signifier you need in there to like kind of read beautifully, and still, again, drive a story, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. He's one of my heroes for sure. Those are right above me. Those are the collections.
I love them.
Yeah, those are the
Seth killed it on those covers too.
So
it's just it's killer. Yeah, Fantagraphics put out really good collections you guys should all own. So and that's cool that the state agreed to do it.
Hank Ketchum did us the Menace are right beside them too.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
good
brilliant.
Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, so I was going to talk, going back to Alphabet, when you were talking about your process, there was a part that, and this is something I've done, and it's just kind of, I don't know, I love the idea because of my handwriting isn't the greatest, so that when you showed how you were doing your lettering, where you did digital lettering, but then you printed it out in blue line and then went over it, and you said something about on a font that's pretty similar to your actual handwriting.
Yeah. So what's great is, and I have tried over the years to make a font. It never works for me. I don't know why. I think it's because the way I actually hand letter is kind of randomized too. Like I don't draw. I don't print the letter M the same way every time, so it always looks wrong to me. It doesn't feel like it's my voice. But the spacing and weight. There is a font. What's it called? Okay, I have to check. It's from Blambot. It's a free Blambot font.
That's a free font, because usually their good fonts aren't.
Oh, I might have bought it actually. You know what? I don't know. That's a good question.
It looks pretty good for a free. I doubt that one that you're using was a free one. I could be maybe, but if it is,
well, I'll you guys can look it up and tell me.
I always do.
All these people. Oh, back issues. It's just called back issues.
Okay.
And it's all I need, in that it's got a regular and then like a bold italic. Those are the only two. Like I only use those two pens, like a 3, a number 3 and a number 7. 0.3, 0.7 for the weights I need. So I only have those two weights anyway. And so when I'm sketching, when I'm doing the pencil thing, I do just I kind of know what size my printed text is going to be. So I kind of like rough it out. And I already have a rough script. And then when I scan in the pencils, I put together kind of like a template for printing out the blue lines for the inks. That's when I just type the font, the back issues font right in there for spacing. It just tells it just shows me exactly how much room I need, instead of me doing like my Ames guide and like running the line.
Spacing is the hardest part. I have a course on comic lettering, and the spacing, that's the reason but that's why I like this hybrid method, because when you go over it looks hand drawn, but you don't have to, it's just so hard to get the spacing right when you're working totally traditional with lettering. And I guess if you're a letterer by trade, you've mastered that, so it's not that. But I haven't put that much time into my lettering where it's like it's just way easier to type it out in a font and then print it out and then go over it with a pen.
And I still sometimes rewrite while I'm inking.
Yeah.
So like I go back to letter what I've laid out, and I'm like, I don't like that turn of phrase, or didn't I just say the word how like in the last bubble? And so you'll see often on the originals, like I re-letter it anyway. Yeah. But just that font, it's my click track.
Yeah.
So yeah, Back Issues by Blambot's my like click track. That's my like, I'm overdubbing it when I'm hand lettering.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? I do almost the same exact thing with my comics, where I love the look of hand lettering, and I can kind of hand letter traditionally, but it's just like I don't have like on an illustrator's time frame. It's not really happening. But even though it makes it kind of a harder pain for like edits, like if there are any edits from a publisher or something like that, like on text, last minute, which happens, but I do like doing exactly the technique you're talking about, Jay, where you print it out. Often I'll light box it, and
I used to do that a lot too. Yeah,
and I love that technique for the exact reason you were saying, Jay, like where it shows you the exact spacing you have to work within. And honestly, I think a lot of cartoonists, when they're starting out, would just benefit themselves a lot by like focus on that speech balloon like in there and how much real estate that's going to occupy before you start bothering with the drawing and stuff, because you could be wasting a lot of time or effort. And especially if you're doing stuff like Jay, where it's like real minimal, like if you need minimal indications of like backgrounds and stuff like that, like you're really going to want to know what space is being blocked,
for sure. And then too, when you get to that point, two things to add too is one is if you're writing for yourself, you need to learn quickly how much room you have.
Yes.
With your art style, like you need to figure this out. But I was just going to say too, with something minimal, the word balloon placement becomes even more important.
Yes.
Because if you have barely anything in the panel, you've got to dance those balloons around in a pleasing way too. You can't just throw those in there. They kind of have to be part of the layout now in a very, because they stand out in a different way.
Yeah.
If you had a more realistic style with realistic color, dense stuff happening, the balloons, like just black on white type, kind of just become separate, almost like you don't notice them as much. But if you've got these bold shapes with bold colors, those balloons stand out. So
But I think the trick, and with good lettering, is for it to sort of be invisible.
Yep.
Even though it is, but if it's off a little bit, like you said, in a style like yours, it's going to be noticeable. Yeah. Because bad lettering will just destroy the best artwork out there. So I mean, and that's why it's really such an important discipline that unfortunately a lot of artists don't. They don't put as much thought into.
When I was teaching some cartooning classes, I spent an entire class on lettering, and people were like, ugh. And I was like, no. And same thing I'm saying. I was like, well, that the alphabet's hand drawn, right? People don't really think about that. I'm like, this is art.
Yeah.
You're dismissing it. You're not even thinking about how important this is, and it's going to be built into every comic you tell. So you better learn how to do this. Like it's just as important as learning how to draw a car, which is also hard, or horses. But you got to learn how to letter at least a little, if only for yourself. And then again, it just helps you with your design.
Yep.
Your overall design sense.
And it gives you more control as an artist too, because a lot of people who don't learn lettering, then you have to rely on an editor. And then especially if you're doing indie comics, I think what appeals to a lot of us about it, because it's definitely not the money, I think what appeals to us about it is like, unlike even an animation or a Hollywood production or anything that might even pay substantially better, you get like full author vision. And like your ability to do lettering within your own works is like you can hang on to that part and also like have a better ability to create exactly what you want, because there's nothing worse than, you know, getting work back that you weren't able to letter and seeing just terrible type placement or bad fonts or something chosen for your work, like, which, you know, Jay, you've done illustrations. So we've all probably had that experience where it's like put in an article or something and they've slapped some type on it and you're like, what did you do? Like, what did you do to this illustration? You know, the beauty of learning it is you get that authorship.
Oh, for sure. I was going to say too, one thing. So this behind me, I don't know if you
Can you
pull
pull
me up.
That
This
is
is,
neat.
I don't know if I'm, oh, maybe Gold could get mad, but that's some of issue 2 on the wall there.
I think it's small if no one's going to be able to.
And I'm
I
trying
love
to,
it.
I'm trying to see. No,
Do you
can't
print
see.
them in sequence as you're working?
Yep, I do spreads because I'm designing for spreads.
Smart.
I don't know. It helps with my flow of, I don't know. It's like mounting the animals you hunted down.
I totally get that. That makes sense though, because sometimes you'll print them out.
I was
hang up spreads. Doesn't work.
Yeah, well, and that's how I edit too. Because again, speaking of drawing digitally, it's harder for me to catch my mistakes until I see it on the wall, and so I write notes on those. But I thought you might be able to see. But I'm doing a thing with Figgy that is not uncommon in 60s and 70s comics. Mostly, I think Archie did it more than anybody else. And again, you don't really notice it in old comics unless I point it out to you. But to use light color in the word balloons. So some of the word balloons in Figure, like a 30% cyan, some are 30% magenta, some are 50% yellow. And so on those page flows, again, just using them as like a color element now. And I assign that color to that character on that page. So
I think. Oh, sorry, Jay. I was going to say just the fact that we can't totally see that background. You can see the splotches of color, and you can see how well designed the layout is just by the way the color. You know, you'll see a couple pages with some pink, and then we'll go into the blue, and then I mean, it just you can tell it's well designed just by what little we see in those little almost thumbnail like little blotches of color behind you there.
Yeah, the color's already kind of telling a story as a whole, because you definitely you see it transition from different color themes. That's great.
Yep, moving from scene to scene, and it gives you that, you know, well, I like working with color, and I like to move it around. I guess I have a short attention span, maybe.
I definitely have ADHD, so it's like when we talk about moving from project to project, that's totally me in a nutshell. Although I wouldn't work on 2 comic book projects at the same time, but that sounds kind of like what you're saying too. But I know before we start wrapping things up, there is one thing I wanted to kind of touch on, and that is like beyond the comic book, but the ads and things. Are we going to see, like, I know in Dwellings you had like vintage style mock ads and things like that. Are we going to see that in Figgy Furthermore as well?
A little bit less, in a different way, yes. So in Dwellings, because of that, again, the slight difference, there's a nostalgia and a retro aesthetic for both of these for sure. But I'm approaching them a little bit differently. So with Dwellings, because we wanted it to look almost like it was a flea market garage sale find, the ads had to be there. And for me, it became this great, again, using those limitations. So there have to be ad breaks. So, okay, how am I going to work this into a horror story? It became this perfect way, because they're not consistent throughout story to story where they're placed. They end up being tension breaks in the horror. You know, so you have a shock, and then you have an ad page, and then it's like the next day or something. You know, like so the placement of them became like a beat that then I could use to my advantage, and then create these ads that looked like they were in the way, but were actually informing the story. So had more content that if you did read them, it actually enhanced the story rather than took away from it. So very specific what I was doing in Dwellings. With Figgy, there's no real excuse or reason to have the fake ads in the same way. However, I am building in all kinds of weird gimmicks just because it's fun.
Yeah.
So in issue 1, it's a bit of a spoiler, but I don't think I'm spoiling the whole gag. But like, there is an ad that Figgy actually reaches into and takes something from.
Oh, I love it.
There's more. Yeah, there's more interplay. Like on the wall, there's a poster for a magic show that just comes up at one point. And, you know, like, so I'm definitely playing around with that stuff again. And also, like I said, too, there's a craft page in every issue at the back. So, you know,
yeah, I hope I
a lot
didn't
of fun.
steal something that you were already planning on doing when I did the back cover to my variant cover, but
Perfect.
I did some paper dolls of Figgy,
Oh,
but and then
sweet.
I tied in is it Kitschy? Is that
Yeah. Kitchen,
I tied in the
yeah.
character is like she's the one kind of giving the class on making these paper dolls. So
It's perfect, dude. Like you get it.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I'm doing on my channel, and I will do at some point. I will do a video on paper dolls or something like that too, because
yeah, again, Bill Wogan, who did Katie Keene. You know, there's all these. That was a big thing. Paper dolls was like a big deal in comics for a while too. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything before we start wrapping up that I mean, obviously we'll mention the Kickstarter again and everything, but anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention or anything?
So yeah, the three kind of big things that are happening early in the year for me are, you know, Figgy Furthermore launches early next week, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day, and the Dwellings collection is out from Oni in April, and then there's, you know, keep your eyes on Oni Press. There's some big news coming soon.
Exciting.
So there's yeah.
And you're in Ontario, right?
I am. I'm in Guelph, Ontario, along with Seth, actually, who we were talking about earlier. So he's
nice.
one of my neighbors.
Yeah, we've got a friend. Are you familiar with Christopher Runsman at all?
I know that name.
Okay, yeah, because he does these one page. He's got a YouTube channel right now where he just take requests for 1-page comic strips, and you can throw out anything, and he'll do it right there. He's not doing it, but I've got a few collections of his, but I just wanted to mention him, and also I don't know, Josh, are you going to TCAF?
Oh, I'm not doing. I don't think I'm going to be able to do TCAF this year. Although that
I'll
was
be
literally
at
my
TCAF this year.
favorite show. That was my favorite show that I've done. It's a good one.
It's a good vibe, eh? Through in the
well,
Canadian
honestly, it's one of the few conventions I've done where like even the organizers are just like stopping by your booth, like, "Are you okay? Like, is everything okay? Like, is everything good? Like, do you need anything?" Like, they're bringing you water and stuff. They're just like, it's general, and 9 times out of 10 people are coming there for indie books, which is another kind of rare thing where they're not quite going in there and going, "Oh, I haven't heard of this." It's like, no, I haven't heard of this. Like, that's a great convention. Yeah.
How great is it that it's a free event?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Right? So people can just go, I don't know, I'll go see what these art comics are like, and just walking off the street.
People discover comics that normally might not even know that they love comics, you know.
Exactly. I kind of think they should do that with more conventions.
Yeah.
Jay, I wanted to ask you like one thing before we kind of wrap on the asking stuff. So as a writer, I find it hard to do things like Figgy Furthermore. Like, it seems really honest and sweet and kind and sincere, even though it's goofy, you know? And it's like, I think that's harder to write than, like for me, like if I wrote something sarcastic or something sad or something like that, like it's a little easier to tap into those things. How do you, and I know you've done stuff for like Teen Titans and stuff. Like my kid's read some of your work. He loves it. How do you write how do you get in the headspace to write for that kind of thing where it's got like sincerity and joy and those hard things, I think, for people to write? Like, to me, I think that's much like a daily strip or something like that.
And there's a juxtaposition between that and the horror stuff
the horror is more how I'm feeling these days, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So that comes a little more naturally. That's a good question. It is weird. It is very nostalgic for me to try to like, I'm accessing some kind of childhood thing, and I had 2 kids of my own. They're grown now, but you know, there's that too. So I'm trying to remember the things the beauty in the simple, like just a kid laughing their head off at something stupid.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, Watterson did that really well. He could do stuff that was kind of a little bit edgy, a little bit acerbic, but like really sincere and beautiful.
Yeah.
And Ghastly Alley, like Frank King, we were talking about earlier. Some of those things they almost make me cry.
Yeah.
Like, they're just so beautiful with young Skeezix when like they're just walking around looking at a sunset.
Yeah.
And it's like the most beautiful thing you've ever read. Not just seen, but read, where you're just like, this is so sincere. So it's some kind of, I'm accessing some kind of nostalgia with that too. It really is time traveling. I'm trying to, it's those parts I haven't yet forgotten.
That's well said.
All right. One more time, Jay, anything you want to mention? I mean, we'll talk again. The Kickstarter for Figgy Furthermore goes live in 5 days, but don't sleep on that. Don't wait. Just go to the campaign right now and sign up so you'll be at least alerted to it. There's a link in the description of the video for that. Also, if you don't mind, I'll throw up my variant cover. Is that cool?
Oh yeah.
Please. I want to see this.
And also, guys, sign up because I don't know how many of these wax packs Scott's gonna be able to pull together. You know, you gotta.
I'm gonna start like a side hustle doing wax packs. So this will be a good proof of concept to see how tired my arm gets from applying all this wax and stuff and wrapping all these.
Oh yeah, and check out their Boris Karloff.
Their books print beautifully too. So that's another reason to back this. Is like you can get beautifully printed books. Like they care about the printing.
Even the poly bag that the books came in was designed.
Yeah,
you know, the Arnold.
So great. Yeah.
Okay, so first I'm going to pull up one of Jay's cover. I think this is issue 1.
That's so great.
That's
issue 3. Yeah.
And what's the kid's name again?
Kitschy.
Oh,
no, his boy is Howsy. How's he doing?
Howsy, that's right. Okay. All right.
I love it.
And so I'm going to pull up my variant cover. This is for issue 6. Now, if you back the campaign, do you get all 6 issues, or how does that work?
You'd have to ask Gold Key. Okay, I don't know those secrets yet.
All right. Okay. We'll find out. Maybe we'll get Gold Key on because we do. This is the cover I did. It's kind of a wraparound. If I can, I don't have connected, but so there's a story where Howsy, I guess does he fall down the sewer or something, and Figgy has to go after
falls
him?
down a sewer hole. Yeah, because you know. I'm making all ages comics, but not ones that teachers will like.
Yeah, of course.
Ones that kids will like.
Yeah, that's the ones that's the only kind that matter. but the one thing I wanted, because the couple of things that Gold Key is really famous for, one is their painted covers, but that's more their adventure comics. The design, but also the graphic design. So I really wanted to work in that. I like that idea of the whirlpool, of him getting sucked in the whirlpool. So I wanted to do like a circle motif with it. So I had a lot of fun just with the.
And I wish they could see the wraparound because it's such a great.
Yeah, well, I'll throw up the back. You can kind of your eyes can kind of put it together. You can see a little bit.
That's great.
Of the, so I had so much fun with this, and I hesitated to kind of give it more of a vintage look, but I think in Gold Key most of the covers were pretty. The process was a little tighter.
Slicker. For sure. Yeah.
So, Yep. So I would have loved to. Otherwise, I would have loved to give it a little more of a vintage.
And speaking of the painted, the classic painted covers from Gold Key, they did it. I'm pretty sure Gold Key announced it on Instagram today. But we do have a variant that is a realistic, ghostly painting of.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So
they said do whatever you want in your style, and I'm like because and then I thought about doing something a little more realistic, like kind of the way I do my comic Young and the Dead, which is, I don't know how you'd explain that. But
I mean, that would have been cool too. But
I wanted to do something kind of like yours, but a little off model, add something a little different to it. So hopefully I did it justice and brought something new to it. I had a blast with it. So anyway, if you want to check out my cover and all the other cool stuff, and you got some awesome. Can we mention some of the other variant cover artists?
Sure.
I know Paul Pope's doing one, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And so, then I got my old friend to jump in. So yeah, his is it's actually I'm not going to say anything about it. It's going to be really cool.
Okay. That's why you want to sign up for this campaign, because I'm sure you'll be able to see it once the campaign goes live.
Yeah. Well, maybe not Paul.
Okay. Well,
we'll waiting for it. Might just be a question mark, but you can trust me. It's going to be awesome. And again, actually talking to Paul Pope about this too, he had that same thing, Scott, where he's like, I want to draw it in your style. I'm like, that's not why I'm reaching out to you, dude.
Right.
like different for you because you and I already share that aesthetic, but Paul, I don't think Paul stuff is retro at all, right? So,
Right.
but we had this long talk where he's like, "Oh, I want to do this thing." I was like, "No, I want you to go nuts."
Yeah.
Like I want something really weird from you. So we had this debate, but I think we came up with a really cool compromise, actually.
All right, cool, awesome. Okay, all right. So definitely check out and follow Jay on social media. I think I was watching your YouTube channel, and on there you've got a link tree where you can go to your portfolio. And
Exactly. There's a link tree on all of my social media, so no matter where you start, it'll lead you to the other things. Yeah. But I'm most frequently posting on Instagram where I'm just letter J, like J Stevens Comics.
Okay.
That's, I mean, if not every day, every other day, I'm posting something there.
Cool. So definitely follow Jay. Follow the Kickstarter link in the description. I'm excited I'm just thrilled to be part of it and everything. And I'm just, like I said, Arnold's an old friend of mine from Gold Key, and I'm hoping that and I'll talk to Josh and Corey, because the way we do this, we kind of rotate hosting duties, but I know correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes you guys wait till the last minute to find a guest. So if we can get more like either people doing variant covers or anything that wants to come on, or guys from Gold Key. And we're happy to keep promoting this and everything throughout the campaign if we get some guests and stuff on. So we'll talk to Gold Key about that and everything. But definitely check out the campaign because it's I've kind of got a little stake in that, and so but with the cards and everything. So and Jay stuff's just incredible, and I have to be honest, I wasn't aware of Dwellings until they brought you up, and I went looking at it and I saw the trades coming out. So I'm like, I'm going to wait for the trade. And then, but what I've seen of it is just totally up my alley, and I cannot wait to
I think you're going to dig it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're going to wish that you did it. Like in the same, like, cause we like the same things. We like the same things.
Oh man, I wish I thought of that. All right. Okay. So Josh, anything wrapping up? Anything you want to promote or anything?
Yeah. So support indie comics. That's huge. So make sure you're following Jay's stuff too, because like Jay's done mainstream stuff, a lot of that, and you want to support the indie stuff so he doesn't have to do as much mainstream stuff, right? Like that's what I'm saying. Just like go out there and support the independent stuff, the solo stuff, because that's where the lifeblood is for cartoonists. And speaking of that, if you want to support indie comics, also consider picking up Jacob's Apartment or Two Stories, my 2 graphic novels that are currently out. And if you want to see a Victorian story about the Brownings and supernatural seances that actually happened in Elizabeth Barrett Browning's lifetime, and see the process of making that slug of a graphic novel, feel free to follow me on YouTube.
All right, Corey.
Yep. As always, you can follow my stuff at coreykerr.com/email, because I've become rather disenchanted with the trying to enrich the billionaires who do not have our best interests at heart on the other social media channels. So jump on my email newsletter, and that'll make sure that you get to see this little hack of how to deconstruct your work that I've been working on for the last hour, so you can kind of figure out how to improve the stuff that you're doing in a more constructive and deconstructive way, rather than just like, it looks bad and I want it to look good. There's a bit of a formula of how you can look at different aspects comparatively to improve those. And so that'll be a video that is coming out hopefully in the next day or two. So check that out on my channel.
All right. And as far as me, you can go to my website at circworks.com, where I have digital products to help you make comics back faster, more efficiently, take some of the weight off you. I also have my comic book, Young and the Dead, Kids versus Zombie adventure story. Just think Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. If you're a fan of Goonies, Monster Squad, E.T., all those cool 80s action films with kids as the protagonist, it's like that, but with zombies. Check that out. I got the final issue penciled, inked. I scanned all the pages, and I'm going to start toning it and everything. So so I'll have a Kickstarter at least sometime this year, maybe a little later. But
exciting, man!
So definitely check that out. Or since you're here on my channel, once this is over, go check out some of the latest videos where I'm taking ephemera from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, figuring out how it works, reconstructing it, re-engineering it, and not only just designing it, but I also build this stuff like for instance, like monster cereals, creating my own monster cereals, or old Halloween makeup. Did you guys have this stuff in Canada?
Oh, for sure. The fake blood and the I remember that. That's awesome.
So definitely check that out on my YouTube channel. And so this show we usually do it every single week, but it's kind of weird the way we do it because it rotates between my channel, Josh's channel, Corey's channel. That can get a little confusing. It's usually on a Thursday, but that can change too, depending on schedules and things. So if you want to know exactly when we're going to go live, who the guest is going to be, what the topic is, join our mailing list. There's a link in the description. Oh, maybe I forgot to put the link in this one. I'll have to go see. But anyway, but we do have a mailing list where you can sign up because YouTube doesn't always notify you. So definitely check that out. And last but not least, I wanted to thank everyone in the chat. I wish I got a chance to pull up more of your comments and things, but it looks like you guys were chatting amongst yourselves as well. So we appreciate you guys watching live, and we appreciate anyone that's going to be watching this after the fact. So thank you, and we will see you guys next week. Should I roll out with the?
Why not?
All right. Let me find it here. Where is it? Where is it?
Should be under.
Okay, I found it. Okay. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
This one goes out to the Artcasters. Ooh, Artcasters! I say you're catching your spell, Artcasters. Catching your spell. Ooh, you're gonna cast that spell. Strike a hell. Whoa!